Hello everyone, welcome to another stream with Bismarck. And
Hello.
today we will talk about the Flak Towers, specifically in Vienna and then also in general. And for that I give you a short overview. Here we have it prepared here. So basically at first I will show you some images and background information on the Vienna Flak Towers and specifically. Then we do a bit of Q&A about the first section. Then we have some general thoughts about flak towers, air defense, and strategic bombing, whatever comes up. So when Bismarck and I talk around, and then we have a Q&A section for this too. So then, oh, here's the chat. Excellent. So then we will start now. So here you can see the Flak Tower in Vienna, which is a command tower, which is in the best shape. Basically, it's used as an aquarium, basically, or it houses a lot of aquariums. It's called Haus des Meeres, House of the Sea, as you can see here on the right side. And you also notice in the next picture, here we have from another side, and here you can see this flak tower is also used for climbing. So you can climb this flak tower. I don't know how hard it is to get in there and how much it costs, or if you need a membership or something. But if you ever want to climb a flak tower legally, this is your way to do it. This is, I think, in the Esterhazy Park in Vienna. So, and probably also the safest way to climb a flak tower.
Is this you supporting the local tourism industry?
In a way, I think up there's even a museum in there, and I think somebody said you can get in there for free, and I think they're also building an extra elevator now or something.
Oh, multi-purpose building. Who would have thought?
Yeah, and but there are some people in politics that are of course concerned because slave labor was used and people died building these, and so they think they should be never used for anything or something because making money and anything else is bad in general. So, I mean, it was quite funny because I read the interview. One guy wanted to repurpose them, and he especially said we would preserve, for instance, the graffiti in there from slave laborers and others, and make certain museum parts. But this was certainly not enough for some people, it
All
seems.
right.
So I don't know. I read both statements a bit. What is true and what not is always the problem. But it appeared that one part seems to be a bit more doctrinal. And I think you remember I sent you a text once that was very propagandistic in terms of the Vienna Flak Towers. And yeah,
Yeah, it was an interesting read.
yeah. it's. I mean, there's a reason we call Vienna the Rote Wien, the Red Vienna.
Hmm.
You are again way louder than me. Okay, I will turn you back more. So hopefully now it's better. So, oh, you already did it too.
Well, I made a small adjustment to my own microphone. I can like switch
So,
a switch to reduce the sound a little bit. I don't know if that was enough.
yeah, I turned you down back too. I hope this is fine. So, is Bismarck and Mia now fine?
It's probably gonna take them like
Yeah,
20 seconds until they revise.
yeah, that's the thing. So I will continue now. What we have here. Now here we have the combat tower in the Arenberg Park, which is quite closely also located to the command tower. And I think these two towers are very close to each other and the most in general. And this is the Type 2 construction. So basically the latest was the Type 3, which we also have in Vienna, and only in Vienna. This is another view on the combat tower. And as you can see, it's more rectangular and everything. It's way they were way more inefficient than the Type 3 as far as I read. So now it sounds great, excellent. So, and here you can see how it looks basically inside. So you have the upper areas, which is for the military. In the middle there was, or in the upper lower part, there was production facilities. Then there was air conditioning, and then there was a hospital and air raid shelter for civilians, basically. And here you can see the difference. These are not to scale, how the combat tower of Type 2 and Type 3 looked. And as you can see, if you go from the circles, the small ones here would be the place for the anti-aircraft guns. I mean, this is way too small, I think. You can see the amount of space you need is way bigger with this than with that configuration.
Yeah, Type 3 does look better.
Yeah, it looks better in many ways. And I think I read an architect wrote it was way more efficient in any way. And I think they also look better. So I mean, it looks better and it's more efficient. So what do you want to have more?
It looks better. It's efficient. It's German.
So, and this is the command tower for the command tower part 2, and as you can see here, it's repurposed a bit here. I think this is radio antennas or something, or for cellular phone. I don't know exactly. And this would be where the radar would be housed usually. I guess the Würzburg, or how it was called. And this is now the Type 3 combat tower. And I took this picture because you can see here we have a gas station right in front. And note, the prices are not for a gallon, they are priced for 1 liter. So don't get your hopes up.
It's going to be disappointing for a lot of American viewers.
Yeah. And here's another perspective. And also you can see here some stuff for telecommunication also going on. And as you also can see, there are no real windows anymore. I think I don't have a picture of a Type 1, the first one, but the first Flak Towers, they all had windows or something. And I think they removed it in part 2 or something, in Type 2.
These bars that are kind of sticking out and that look like, well, it's hard to really describe them. What are they for?
I don't know really. I think probably from the location, I would say they probably were for supporting during the construction, that you can these platforms, I assume, because you also have smaller ones here. And I know, for instance, I read a while ago, but a long time, so I don't know if my memory serves me correctly or it was bullshit maybe, but I think they had, at least in Hamburg and Berlin, sometimes the problem that the blast wave of the bombs threw off the personnel on the towers, and that they had nets there, but these are too far away or not too far away to provide that you can put a netting there. But basically, looking at the construction, that they're in accordance to the platforms, I assume they were for supporting during the construction.
That makes sense. They're right below those rounded platforms, so yeah, that makes sense.
I assume it this way, yeah. And these platforms, they were used for how's it called? Flakscheinwerfer, searchlights.
Searchlights, yeah.
And also small flak for low-level attacks. But as far as I read, in Vienna they weren't used because there were no low-level flight attacks, basically. I think, which is also due to the distance and the priority. I think the.
Oh, how mountainous is the region around Vienna?
It's flat. It's really flat.
Okay. Well, then they just didn't do it out of different reasons.
Yeah, I think range was a real problem because Vienna is quite far away.
Well, they also came from Italy, and bombed from bases in Italy, so that shortened the range quite a lot. And a lot of I just noticed from the German Jagdgeschwaders that were based in Bavaria, they were covering Austria as well at the end of the war.
So, and here now we have the same combat tower again, and with its Type 3, how's it called, command tower. And as you can see here also, we have these spars in a different way. And yeah, it seems probably there's for something for supporting these platforms. in a way.
Yeah, that must be literally to just support them during construction, or
And
maybe you could no, it doesn't make sense hanging something off there.
yeah.
It's probably just an artifact from construction. Yeah.
I mean, the plan, I think there were certain plans for putting pictures, I think, of all the fallen, or not all the fallen, but of the major fallen people on the Flak Towers in the future or something, if they would have won. And a friend of mine noted, well, they needed a bit more for that. And I think there sometimes, I think you can see hooks or something, but I'm not sure. And also not which type it was. So there's also some discussion going on. And here it was written, somebody wrote never again, because, well, in case you don't, if you see that and think, hey, that really looks cool, I want to build it again. So someone put a graffiti there just to make clear that you get the message. So, and I personally, for those who want to visit, I recommend this one in the Augarten, because these are for the best accessible, and there's a wide area around, so you can walk around and take pictures from nearly every perspective and everything. And I like them a lot. And also the funny thing is, if you get out there, if you use the subway station, the exit is Friedensbrücke, which means peace bridge. And if you want to get the full Wehrmacht experience, there is a butcher there at the Friedensbrücke which offers horse meat. So you can have it all if you go there.
Oh dear. Oh dear.
I don't know if
he
he have,
that joke.
I don't know if he offers draft horse meat, but
Can you just quickly? Yeah, I mean, you already told me, but these people might be interested. Were there any plans of trying to dismantle these towers after the war?
I think that this in Vienna, I don't know especially, but in Germany they tried it. I think they did it in Berlin or something. The main problem was they needed a lot of explosives and a lot of destruction was caused. And I think in Hamburg they canceled it because they were, of course, Hamburg was to a part destroyed, but was still too much working in the vicinity that a destruction would have caused more damage. And I think in Austria I read that basically we could also use them to support our victim theory, that we were a victim of the Nazis and everything, so we kept them in a way. But what I read, usually if you build something, you keep, for I don't know exactly why, for destruction reason or others, you keep certain margins or certain areas open. And they didn't do this. Thus, they are more hard to destroy than anything else. So, but specifically, they are not built like something similar. And I had a question of someone: couldn't you place the flak guns just on top of buildings? And the thing is, we know from this one that the roof had, I think, 3.5 meters thickness, and the walls only 2.5. So the roof was the strongest part. So if you had to put up flak on top of a regular building, you probably had to reinforce the roof and also the whole building and everything, so it probably wouldn't work out in any way. And
you have to guard the gun and supply it with ammunition, and
everything.
If that building gets destroyed, which it quite easily does compared to a flak tower, the gun is gone as well.
So they were basically also, I think, built that they could be attacked directly, I assume, and still survive in a way. And if you have a regular building and put flak up there and it gets attacked, it's probably toast, even with veneer miss. And these things, they were very hard to destroy. I mean, here's some destruction, and as far as I remember, this was, I think, kids were playing after the war, and they made a fire, and there was still ammunition stored, and then the part blew up or something. And so this was basically not a lot of care was taken for quite some time of them.
Go out and play, they said.
So here we have a close-up. Yeah, here exactly. You can see here this is broken up. And I think this was from an internal explosion that was caused after the war. I'm not 100% sure because I read it quite a while ago and then I made the script later on and I didn't focus on that part. And also, as you can see here, it has, I think, 16 sides, but if you look from the distance, it looks usually like it's round. At the top, it's more, you have more sides. So, but even that part, if you're far away, you think it's round shaped. So what?
Interesting buildings, these Flak Towers.
Yeah, and this is the command tower, a close-up look, and here you can see a crow sitting there.
That's that fabulous Vienna wildlife that I keep hearing about.
Yeah, and here you can see the small parts of iron sticking out. I don't know if these were made for kept for putting something else on there, or if they're just not cut off. So I read a few, but I forgot. So now I think we do the first Q&A section about the Vienna Flak Towers in detail or something. So if Bismarck have any questions before the first question show up, so please post your questions now. Ideally use @militaryhistoryvisualized and or @Bismarck beforehand, so we can see them more easily in the chat.
So just to remind everybody, there are Flak Towers in Vienna, in Hamburg, and Berlin, and that's it, no?
Some people noted that there were other cities with Flak
And
Towers.
they're small ones, right?
Yeah, but they are smaller and different ones. I mean, the concept of having a flag on an elevated position is not something entirely new. I mean, the Luftwaffe also used it to defend certain, how's it called, airfields, but they were not from concrete.
I remember there's a smallish kind of bunker tower somewhere in Baden-Württemberg, also in the south. And it's kind of shaped like a cylinder that gets very pointy at the end. And what I was always told when I was young, but I haven't looked into it myself if it's true, but that was designed so the bombs, if it would be a direct hit, would bounce off essentially. I don't know if that's true, but it's something maybe we can look into. It just came to me right here. I just remembered it.
I think the submarine pens were also quite that most bombs would just bounce or not do anything.
Yeah, in France, the old submarine pens from the Germans, they're still there. Like the French after the war, they tried to blow them up and they just realized they have to pack so many explosives in them that it's not going to be worth it.
Yeah, well, and you can assume now why the most Flak Towers were not destroyed, because they were in the middle of cities. So we have a few questions here. Did you know that the House des Maires bought the tower for €1? I think I read it in a passing, yeah, and this is usually the standard price for stuff.
It's an aquarium, no?
Yeah, it's an aquarium. I don't know if it's how you call it in English. It's a sea museum. I don't know.
Like sea life, just without the live shows.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I wasn't in there, so I don't exactly know. I'm not a fan of zoos. So, why did they build them if they didn't worth the cost? I mean, they didn't know beforehand, I think, to a certain degree, and they put a lot of emphasis on anti-aircraft guns in general in the German armed forces. And the other thing is, cost efficient in a war is always relative, and sometimes you don't know beforehand. Were the Flak Towers particularly concentrated in the industrial centers or important factories, or was it more of a random kind of placement? They were put basically to protect the inner cities, which often also housed industrial elements. So I didn't look specifically at the city layouts and the location of the Flak Towers, but Hamburg was, I think, the first target for the first 1,000 bomber attack. Berlin was, of course, very important, and Vienna was also quite important. Basically, it was a very important town in Austria / southern Germany, whatever.
It's the capital of Austria.
Yeah, it's the capital of Austria. So, and I think Hitler noted the cultural importance of Vienna. So it was quite interesting to read that, because previously I had the assumption that he had a very negative view of Vienna, so I'm not quite sure now what actually is more correct, or in which way. So because I think I heard some rumors or something that he actually wanted to make Linz the capital of Austria in a way, or of Ostmark, whatever. So I have to revisit it once. Do you know any specific stuff about the placement of the Flak Towers?
No, but I know that the surrounding areas of factories where a lot of the workers lived, those had special kind of air raid shelters built for them. Obviously, those are not flak towers, but if we're talking about specifically building a flak tower just because there is important factories and so on, that's not fully the case. There were alternatives, and I think the flak tower was kind of an attempt to fuse civilian protection with a military asset. And in a way that works. I mean, the flak towers were armed, and at the same time, they could defend civilians by offering shelter to a few thousand people. And in that way, if we go maybe back to the cost-effective nature of them, that should also be taken into account, because if we're talking just about the military worth, maybe it wasn't that high. If we look at the complete worth of these towers, we probably have a fuller picture of what they meant for the people that lived around it and the cities that they were located in.
Yeah, and the Luftwaffe general, which I quoted in my video, especially noted that the importance of the civilian protection was in his mind the important stuff.
Yeah. No, so I mean, it's a confidence boost for these cities. I mean, Hamburg was heavily bombed during the Second World War. As Bernhard said, there was a 1,000 bomber raid on that city. I think it was even hit multiple times.
One.
Sorry?
I think it was the first 1,000 bomber raid was against.
I think so. If I remember correctly, that's true. Berlin, of course. I mean, it's the capital. Yeah, it's the gem, let's say, of Germany at that time. And Vienna, of course, also a very important city, since it was the capital of Austria before the Anschluss, and it was still a very important governmental, probably where they kept control of the Austrian region, or made the local politics for Austria back in the day. So it's also a confidence boost for these people, knowing that these massive buildings are there to protect them. And it probably was also used quite a lot in propaganda. I'd have to look into it, but I would imagine that, in the 40s, these kind of big buildings didn't exist that much, and it is quite imposing to see one of them.
Actually, I read, and there was one book had a part about the propaganda, and it seems that they weren't used at all in propaganda.
They weren't?
Nearly not.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the explanation was that the thing is they were really expensive and everything, and if you make a broad propaganda of them, then every town or every city wants one, and they couldn't afford this. So
Clever,
this is probably the reason they probably were featured in local propaganda or something, but not across the nation or something. And
that makes sense.
and the impressive nature should also not be forgotten. When you stand in front of these things, you get a different feeling. It radiates a certain kind of power. I mean, it's power in a way, confidence or something. Yeah, it's like it's a bit over the top. So okay, one for you and me. How did the Allied Air Forces view the Flak Towers? When did they become aware of them, and how effective did they regard them as being? That's a good question, because I don't know the answer. Do you know anything about this, Bismarck?
The Allies knew about them, but in my knowledge, viewed them as relatively insignificant if you take away the fact that, of course, they knew that each flak tower meant that a certain amount of concentration of fire can be put into the sky just from that one location. So what you have in the German air defense, the way it was conceptualized and then later enacted, is essentially that the Germans wanted to create something continuous fire on incoming Allied bomber raids. And I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later on as well, so I don't want to say too much now. And these flak towers, in that sense, enabled the Germans to also place AA guns into the cities. Now, there are alternatives to this. You can say, for example, or you can just put the flak guns into a park and you guard them with a couple of men and you have ammunition there and you can shoot into the sky. Yes, that is true. However, if a bomb goes off in the park and you have all the ammunition lying around, that's not going to be good either. Then there is the idea that you have flak hills or artificial created hills that can create the same amount of fire. However, overall, I would say that the impact of the flak towers, as we said earlier, was not so much on the military side than it was perhaps on the civilian side, with the Allied air forces not really viewing them as that big of a threat. Now, one thing you might want to remember is that during the night raids, sometimes bombers would come in very low, lower than you'd expect. Sometimes they're below 1,000 meters when they drop their bombs. So when you have a couple of 20 millimeters or 37 millimeter flak guns stationed in the city on such a tower, you might have a good shot at these bombers. Of course, it's night. You would have to have ideal conditions to see one of them, but you can put some volume of fire into the sky aimed at one or two of these bombers. So that maybe deters some of the pilots of going too low. But I doubt that the Allies were really concerned about the flak towers per se. About the flak, yes, but the flak towers themselves, probably not.
So next one is for me, are any flak towers complete are any still with nano elevators? You mean with any elevators probably. I mean complete in a functional way, I don't think so. I think they are now in Vienna, they are mostly used for storage, and I don't know how they are in Hamburg. They are some used repurposed. I think one is a club or something, and
that sounds like Hamburg.
And Berlin, I don't know exactly. I mean, you can visit them, but I don't think there's one. I probably would have read something if there were one in functional condition or something at all. I think they're very far away from that and probably will never be in that way restored, at least in the next 10, 20 years. So were there any plans for the flak towers to be turned into pseudo-forts for the inevitable land battles fought in the cities? I don't think so. They were planned in this way, or I mean, at the later end, basically everything was declared a fortress anyway. Even a small village somewhere, it was declared a fortress and had to be defended to the end. So I wouldn't call it a plan, and they were of course used and defended. So, but for the whole defense, and when the first ideas came up in 1940, Germany was far away from losing the war, and so the original plans and everything didn't include that. So no, as far as I know, don't. Bismarck, did they house AA missiles?
No.
So, a question for both of us: was there a Japanese equivalent of these flak towers, either on the islands or mainland Japan? As far as I know, no, not at all. And I think a lot of Japanese cities were mostly still wooden, so they probably wouldn't have needed such high buildings at all. And I think they also had a severe lack probably of concrete. So, I don't know. Do you know anything about this?
I don't. We'd have to ask Justin.
Yeah, I wanted to say that, but
our standard answer when it comes to the Japanese.
Yeah, when it comes to Japanese, and we don't know it, Justin. So, how much do you know about the post-war purpose as visualized from German point of view during the war? Yeah, I mean, they wanted to use them in a propaganda way to put up, I think, images or something. And the design was also inspired, as far as I know, from medieval fortresses. So in a way, I mean, if you look at them, and somebody says them they were built in the Second World War, I get the feeling, yeah, sounds legit. So in a way, they fit in the whole structure. Yeah. So, oh, our chat bumped. So
There's one more for both of us. How would the Allies take the towers? I know that the Soviets besieged some in Berlin. Essentially, they wouldn't. It would probably be very bad in cost-effective ratios trying to take one of those towers. I mean, you can, let's just say you take a couple of howitzer and you try to blast a hole into it. You still have to take that hole. You still have to take the different levels, which probably are secured, every single one of them. And if you have maybe 40 men in one of those towers, you can probably hold off a whole division or more, theoretically speaking. So besieging is essentially what they did, and then they just waited until they capitulated. And I think this happened in Hamburg when the Germans capitulated in Hamburg. I mean, they just left the tower, and the Soviets tried to blast through the towers with their howitzers, and they never got really far either.
yeah, I never read into this. I only heard many times that they tried and failed and bypassed them. So I had to look it up. So I probably go with that what Bismarck said, because
I mean, there is no, the Germans, if you look at these towers, fair enough, there's a couple of guns pointing to the sky, and you have a couple of windows where you can maybe shoot out with an MG42 or something. But they're not very big on area of denial.
Yeah.
So really, if you have a couple of tanks, you can just drive right by, and the Germans can't do anything. Maybe they have a couple of Panzerfaust lying around when they can shoot from the top, and they can shoot at infantry, but that's it. You know, you go just across the street on the other side of the road where there's a couple of buildings in the way from the tower and you can just advance without any problem.
Yeah, I mean, some people pointed out that the guns could actually shoot down, but from what I saw from the construction and everything, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. And also even for the smaller guns, because you would have to place them higher than usual, and I think the elevation even of the flak feeling down to earth was probably not more than 1 or 2 degrees. So I don't think they could shoot down with their
They could
main
probably
armament.
they could probably hit something like a kilometer, 2 kilometers away, but close to the flak tower, I can see how they can fire down.
No direct fire, probably indirect fire. I mean, you can always use for indirect fire, but you won't hit very much in this way. So it would be basically an artillery emplacement. So, was a flak tower destroyed by Allied bombers? Destroyed? Definitely not. I think they were hit sometimes, but I don't know how much damage they caused.
Never really significant.
So, hold your questions for now. We finish up these questions and then we move to the next section, and then there will be the more general questions. So Bismarck and MHV, I favor a bunch of 20mm flak feelings. See Reine Hobsten, but it would. I don't know. That's not really a question. The type at the Stiftskaserne, has it ever been used in nuclear bunker? So there's the combat tower for the Esterhazy Park is basically located in the Stiftskaserne, which is a barracks now. Has it ever been used as a nuclear bunker during the Cold War? I don't know exactly. There are rumors that the Austrian government, in case of war or emergency, should be evacuated there, but some say that makes no sense because it's a rumor, and if they know it and everything. But I think it's definitely used by the Austrian military in a way. And I think one guy in the comment section, of course, you can never confirm or deny this really, said he worked actually in one, and he said it was completely isolated from the outside world. So, and I actually wrote a friend who is a physicist how to calculate if they could withstand a nuclear bomb at what distance. So this probably look into this if we have some time in the future. Is anything about what happened with the Flak Towers during the Battle of Berlin? We covered that already. Did you know that? Yeah, we covered that also. And Yeah, I think we move to the next section now. So basically, originally they were built because there were attacks in Berlin in 1940, and they were set up for defense of major important towns. And it's very important that the upper leadership of the Luftwaffe and also Hitler was very focused on anti-tank guns instead of fighters. And some historians note that this is due to the army focus of Hitler and the leadership in general, that they always view guns and artillery as the solution to everything. And
I mean, you had in 1944, you had a brief moment in time where Hitler literally contemplated of scrapping the whole fighter production and putting all the resources into AA guns. This is late 1944. He had played with this idea for a couple of times, and he got very close to it. And I think it was Speer who got him to keep the fighter program alive, essentially.
yeah, I think this was at the point. Usually, fighters shot down more than AA guns, and I think in late '44, at the first time, there was a shift that actually AA guns destroyed more enemy planes than fighters. So this was probably at that point.
Yeah.
And why build flak towers in the first place? Because cities were usually high priority targets, and this is, I think, where Bismarck takes over now, because you explained that quite well in your strategic bombing video.
Sorry, can you say that again? Because I just answered the question in chat.
So why build flak towers in general, or anti-aircraft defense in cities?
Yes.
So, which you explained a bit in your strategic bombing video.
Yeah, so obviously the Allies were, especially by 1942, it really started, and then if it goes into 1943, 1944, we're seeing the big bombing raids over Germany. Daytime, it's the Americans; nighttime, it's the Brits, and they're coming essentially as a continuous stream. Initially, it's a couple of times a week, or a couple of times a month, then a couple of times a week, and then it's pretty much daily. Now, if you want to defend from an incoming bomber raid, first of all, you have to, visualize a little bit how that looks like. It's not a giant, massive formation of more than a couple of hundred bombers, right? These guys come in waves, and they're kind of staggered between altitudes, and they're not coming in as one big blob. That's the image we always get, but usually they flew in kind of waves that came pretty quickly after each other, but sometimes they also came from different directions and so on, trying to get past the different defenses that the Germans had positioned across the north, the border to the North Sea. What's that called in English? The border to the sea.
Baltic Sea.
Yeah, like not the Baltic Sea, but essentially once you start flying over into Germany, we had pretty much a belt of defensive installations there with flak and fighters and so on. And what they would do later on is try to penetrate that line, not just in one point, but in many points. And then later on, that shifted again to one point because of the tactics the Germans took and so on. But it's kind of a game that's being played, right? But what the flak essentially has to do is, during the time that a enemy bomber formation penetrates German airspace, what the flak wants to do is pretty much provide a continuous barrage on these guys. I think it's called continuously pointed fire or something. And this is what you have on all the approaches to the major cities. You have a lot of flak guns on a stretch of a couple of kilometers. Coastline, yes, that's the word I was looking for, thank you. So you have a belt, and a very deep belt, essentially, of flak guns all the way from where the Germans expect the bombers to come in to the major cities. And if you just Google your cell phones, you can find some maps that detail exactly where these kind of entry points were and where the Germans placed their AA guns. And what happens is, of course, that the Germans have to anticipate where these bomber formations are going. And it takes, for an 88 shell, it takes just under like 30 seconds for a shell to reach 8,000 meters. So obviously you have to aim ahead. And 8,000 meters, that's roughly 23,000 feet, roughly. So you're standing there and you're trying to calculate where these bombers are coming, and you're trying to pinpoint the firepower on these guys. This is obviously quite hard, but it's made harder by the fact that the Americans and the Brits as well start taking evasive maneuvers once in a while, and also try to confuse the Germans of where they're exactly going. Now, when we talk about making adjustments to their path, we're not talking just about minor adjustments, right? They're actually sometimes changing course by 20, 30, 40 degrees, and they're changing altitudes. They're changing 500 meters of altitude at a whim, essentially. They go up, they go down, they make a course correction and so on. And trying to get these bombers to pinpoint these bombers and where they're going to be in 30 seconds time is incredibly hard. This is also because obviously you're not talking just about 30 seconds of the gun firing to the shell arriving at 8,000 meters, where most of these bombers are, but we're also talking about a calculation process and the process of contacting each battery by the observer and by the person that calculates the trajectory and so on. And that can take a couple of minutes. There is one point in the attack where bombers cannot make any evasive maneuver, and where they have to bunch up and fly as straight as possible and keep their altitude. And that is when they get very close to the target. And at this point, you have to put the maximum amount of fire concentration against them. And this is where these flak towers start taking a role. It's incredibly hard finding a convenient place inside a city to put a lot of flak towers. Now you can put flak guns. You can put a lot of flak guns around the city that can continuously fire at the enemy as well. But there is a big blob in the middle, of course, which is the target, where there's nothing. So you want to position flak guns in that area as well, because it's not being used. Flak towers are probably a convenient way of doing that, also because they have other positive factors, just like, for example, being a shelter for civilians. However, they're not just the only solution. The Germans also thought about just putting flak guns in open spaces. Now that idea gets dropped very quickly. They also thought about flak Hügel or flak hills, which are sometimes artificial hills inside cities that they would make, and then they had a clear line of fire. Because you got to remember, you can't just put a flak gun in the back garden of some kind of apartment block. First of all, you have no clear line of fire. And second of all, if that thing goes off, for all the windows in the vicinity are gonna break, and you're gonna maybe do some damage to the property. And also, where are you going to store the ammunition? You have to constantly keep people there that are guarding the machine. You have to constantly maintain the machine and keep the public off it. You don't want kids playing around next to it. And this is a draw on your resources. So a flak tower, again, makes sense because it's a military installation where certain levels are completely off limits and nobody can enter or exit without the express permission of the commanding officer. So when you have such an installation that can also then provide firepower in conjunction with all the flak guns that are on the path of the city where the bombers are flying, plus the flak guns that are around it, you start having a situation where you can, like I said, have the maximum amount of fire at an incoming bomber rate that cannot evade what's coming at it. And you actually see that also from American and British sources and pilots. They say that the worst part was always just before you reach the target, because then you knew that all the guns that were around that had just a sliver of a chance of hitting you would fire, and they would just continuously pound your path and barrage your complete formation, and that's where they take a lot of losses. Yeah, that's the long way of explaining why flak towers might be effective.
Excellent. And I think you get a little bit of background noise from the street sometimes, so probably can you close the window? And I will continue now with my presentation part and what we have. Yeah, here we have the reports from the quartermaster general for the shots general needed to shoot down a plane, and we have for the 88mm Flak 36, we need 16,000 shots on average to down one plane, and with the better version, with the Flak 41 of the same caliber, it's almost reduced by 50% to 8,500 shots, and the 10.5 centimeter Flak has 6,000 shots. Sadly, I don't have data for the 128 millimeter gun, which you see in the background. This gives you also some indication how much lead you have to put up in there and how much tons of ammo you need for this whole stuff. So this was quite a lot of expenses.
Yeah, the Germans actually had a couple of studies on the effectiveness of their shells that are being fired by these guns and how far they can expect to do damage away from the epicenter of the explosion. So if you just imagine a shell exploding in the air, if a plane is below that shell, even if it's just half a meter below that shell, it's not going to be damaged all that much. This is because of the way the shell flies and the way in the direction it explodes. It goes upwards and to the sides. Yeah, if imagine being a pilot in a cockpit and having a shell explode just above you, you're probably going to be fine. However, if that shell exploded 3 meters below that point, just below your plane, below your cockpit, oh my dear, you're going to be in a world of trouble. And what essentially they found out is that if you draw a horizontal line and a vertical line upwards from the shell, that's where you have the most destructive capability of the shell. And the further you go out, so you go 1 meter, 2 meter, 3 meter, and 4 meter, you obviously reduce the effectiveness of the shell. And if you are staying within 3 meters, either horizontally or vertically upwards from the shell's explosion, the damage you inflict is going to be very severe. This is with an 88, by the way, not with a 10.5, but it's the same principle. Just obviously this difference changes a bit. If you go to 5 meters, there is going to be damage, but you're probably going to be all right. If you go up to 10 meters, the shrapnel damage is going to be negligible. So these flak hits have to be quite pinpoint to be able to do something. Obviously, you don't have to hit a bullseye, but you have to get very close to do the damage you want in order to take one of these big bombers down. And this is also why you say often with, from pilots' memories, when they could see the explosion of the shell, not just the puff of smoke that everybody knows, but the actual explosion, then they knew it was too close, and that could have been a fatal hit.
Yeah, I mean, when a flak shell explodes, there are basically two types of damage: blast damage and fragmentation.
Yeah.
So blast damage, I think it reduces with exponentially from the damage. So, if you a little bit too much away, and basically nothing gets there. Fragmentation, I think, is a little bit longer. And actually, the Germans had calculations going on if they want to make an impenetrable box in the sky to fly through. And they wanted it to have, I don't know what size, I think 1 kilometer per 1 kilometer or something, an area, and they calculated how much they needed. And it was like a few million flak guns. And I think at that point they had like 17,000 big ones or something. So, and they did calculations during the war for that, what I think Goering and Hitler wanted. And they said, yeah, okay, even if we could build that much, we wouldn't have even the place to put them there. So the general thoughts, I probably will do a video about this or provide you with the data, Bismarck, for the calculation. It was quite insane, because you think, okay, you can put up a barrage of flak up there, and which you can't fly through without being hit. And they did the calculations and basically was like, okay, we need 17 million flak guns, and we have 100 of those in total. And this also would provide only defense for one area. So you had to plaster one part of Germany only with flak guns, just to make one small area that would be really complete area of denial. And when I read that, it was like, okay, I actually thought this would have been easier, but if you see the numbers, it's like okay, that really makes no sense or is almost impossible to do.
I mean, the flak is necessary as a defensive weapon, but compared to fighters, it's pretty inefficient. Now, of course, in the modern times, this is somewhat different. But back in World War II, if you look at the flak of any kind of country, the big thing that you can see is that volume of fire is essentially the deciding factor. And this is also, for example, we see it with American battleships, where the late war variants are literally every single space they had available. There was a 50 cal or 20 mil or a 40 mil flak gun plastered there, because they knew that if a plane comes in, a few quality weapons are not going to be enough. You have to put a volume of fire to stop an aircraft, and that's your biggest defense. It's just rate of fire, a volume of fire, and just the caliber of the rounds, really, that matter.
Yeah, of course, but with a battleship or something, you have a different situation. First of all,
course, yeah.
you know more or less where the plane is going, so you have basically a flak tower situation, an ideal one. The enemy is coming to you. Of course, the enemy doesn't have to fly that straight like a strategic bomber. Then there are also way shorter distances, so and way higher rate of fire because it's small flak and shorter distance, so way less delay and calculations going on. So for this it makes actually more sense. And if you look at nowadays, you still have close air defense. You still have in forms of ballistics, in forms of guns and machine guns. You have the, how is it called, the R2D2 on the ships, on the US ships, the miniguns that shoot down missiles, and I also think planes. But usually planes don't come this close, so I think they're used for missile defense. Whereas against strategic air defense or something, you only have, as far as I know, missiles going on, and not anything in the ballistic sense anymore, because it's the delay and everything is way too much.
Yeah.
So the other thing is, which you already mentioned, flak as an area denial weapon. So mines are usually an area denial weapon, but they usually really are quite effective. Whereas flak as an area denial weapon is probably not that working. It's more of an, I would say, a light discouragement, and also to reduce the effectiveness of the bombing. But to call it the area denial weapon, what do you think, Bismarck? Is this valid, or is this a bit...
No, I mean, if we've seen anything in World War II, it's not an area denial weapon. It is a necessary weapon, of course, because the harder you can make it for the enemy to attack his target, and more costly you can make it for him, the better it is for you. So flak operated not so much as an area denial weapon, more as it's a bit awkward calling it this, but more as a weapon of attrition, because even if you don't cause the plane to go completely down, you might damage an engine or something, which will cause it to be an easier target for your fighters. And if you damage enough, maybe it's not going to make it all the way home. So flak serves a purpose in the sense that even if it does not destroy, it can cause, in a sense, a queer form of attrition, in the way that the enemy has to repair their aircraft, that they suffer manpower losses, and that it makes it perhaps easier for other methods, such as fighters, methods of defense, such as fighters, to take care of the bombers. Flak certainly serves its part in air defense in World War II. It should not be underestimated. The primary killer, however, remain the fighters. Flak, however, needs to be there in order to help, and also to essentially cause the enemy bomber formations to perhaps break up, or to be weakened or softened up for then other means to strike.
We have a very Good follow-up question on this is, are balloons, barrage balloons, an area Dinalwappen?
Not at the altitudes that we're talking at, because we're talking of altitudes that, if we talk about the bomber rates against Germany a day that the Americans did, we're talking about altitudes of 8,000 meters. That's roughly 23,000 feet. You're not going to be able to put a balloon up there with a long enough cable that does anything. However, during World War II, barrage balloons or similar kind of designs were very effective against low altitude strikes. So you see, for example, the Brits having this kind of weapon that they used very successfully against the Dornier 17s that the Germans used at low altitude strike aircraft against, for example, airfields during the Battle of Britain, where they have these balloons that on the press of a button, essentially, they launch themselves up and they have cables. And these would be positioned on the edges of airfields. So as soon as the airfield gets attacked, one of the officers that's in charge of that weapon sees where the Dorniers are coming from, presses that button at the right time, and as the Dorniers are overflying the airfield, they will go straight into that wall of balloons with cables hanging between them. And that claimed quite a few Dornier 17s. And you also have, of course, barrage balloons hanging over harbors sometimes, or above fleets and or ports, and they are relatively effective in deterring perhaps a direct attack, but not so much an indirect attack, especially by a tactical bombing or strategic bombing. But perhaps by tactical strikes, like say torpedo aircraft, dive bombers. That's where we can go into looking at, okay, how did these barrage balloons really influence the choice of the bomber, of the pilots attacking these points, because they probably took into account where those balloons are. But then again, the balloon is extremely localized. If you see the balloon, just try to stay away from anything that's below it, straight below it, right? That's not to say that it always worked. Some pilots were claimed by accidentally flying into a cable. But overall, the usage of balloons is more, let's say, intimidating perhaps, or more cause for concern for the pilot rather than actually being an effective weapon.
So in a similar way, so basically in the air, in contrast to a mine, you have in land warfare, basically it decreases attrition, it decreases stress, and it reduces effectiveness.
Yeah, in a certain sense, yeah.
Yeah. Good. We have some other questions. I scroll now up to get the other questions we had so far. Very important. If you write @MHV, this doesn't help much, because the problem is you need to write @military history visualized or Bismarck and spell it correctly. There's an auto-completion, because only that way our name will be highlighted in chat. So the other
Bismarck
way
with a C.
we can't see, it's way harder to spot. So what we have here, I think I'm soon, okay, we are here, I think we left off. That we have, that we had also, there's one for you, no, I read Bismarck and MHV. Regarding the German preference for AA guns, what was the effect of this later in the war with the collapse of German fighter defense? Was it actually an effective decision? No, it wasn't, because in the later war, the problem was, they had a lack of everything, and probably a stronger emphasis on fighter production and fighter training early on would have helped, but of course the problem was also fuel. So what are your thoughts on this, Bismarck?
What specific question is that?
Regarding the German preference for AA guns, what was the effect of this later in the war with the collapse of the German fighter defenses? Was it actually an effective decision?
Was it an effective decision to focus on flak?
Yeah.
Well, in a sense, I would say if there's one flak force in World War II which stands out, it's probably the German one. So the advances made there had, in a way, a certain positive effect for Germany. I will revert essentially back to what I said earlier: is that flak and fighters have to work in conjunction. Now, if you really have to choose between one of them, which in a sense the Germans didn't, then I would go with fighters, of course. But considering how it later turned out, it was probably good that Germany had a strong flak force available, because when the fighters collapsed, or when the Luftwaffe collapsed, at least Germany had something to defend itself with. Even if the effectiveness is little, had Germany not a strong flak force by that point in time, let's say if it would have been a flak force like the one the Soviet Union had, which wasn't very good, or even the Allied flak forces, the British flak and so on, wasn't that advanced as the German one, then it would have probably been a lot worse trying to do something against these bomber streams coming in. So in a way, it's good that Germany focused a lot on flak, also because it had a dual purpose later on, or during the war. Of course, it could also be used as anti-tank guns or as indirect fire weapons or direct fire weapons. Did it, you can make the cost analysis argument when you look at how many planes were downed compared to fighters and so on. But overall, it's a complete picture. Yeah, air defense is flak plus fighters. Fighters probably being the crucial element, and the flak being the supporting element. But supporting elements are still important.
Yeah, I think I retract my statement, and I agree with Bismarck on this one. So, how many soldiers, military personnel would be stationed in a Type 3 Flak Tower, and what kind of support units would it have? I actually don't know. I'm not sure if there was numbers provided in my books, because I didn't put them in my script. So usually if I don't put it in there, there was very little information in there, or I couldn't find anything that I was confident to use. So sadly, I don't know.
You can theoretically make a calculation based on how many people were needed for a flak gun.
Yeah.
And then you can assume how many people were needed to run the ammunition up and down the lines, and then a command structure and so on. And I think we're talking about maybe 100 to 200 people here.
Yeah, probably around this. I mean, you could make we probably have some data on the organization of certain flak units, and then derive it from that. Or maybe the Kriegsmarine had something similar. So other questions? At Bismarck from Herrado, if the primarily used fighters of the Jagdgeschwader 1 and Jagdgeschwader 11 would have been stretched past the limit in 1943 and destroyed in 1944 during Bombplatte, what do you think? I don't get this.
Second, I see the question.
It's from Herrado at 6:42 p.m.
I see it. If the primarily used fighters from Jagdgeschwader 1 and Jagdgeschwader 11 would have been stretched past the Yeah, I'm sorry, I don't understand the question.
Yeah, me neither.
If you can just rephrase that, then I'll be happy to answer it.
So the next question, I don't know, so maybe I pass it to Bismarck. What is the difference between the Flak 36 and the Flak 41 that gave so much different two shots to kill?
Okay, the Flak, essentially they're just pretty much the same gun. Yeah. However, the Flak 41 fires at a higher muzzle velocity. It also has a higher effective ceiling and a longer maximum range. And if I remember correctly, I think the Germans even said that the 88 Flak 41 is essentially, in all operational purposes, pretty much same as the 12.8 millimeter. Because if you take into account that it is cheaper and also easier to maintain, plus having more or less the same range and effective range and maximum range, plus a slight difference, of course, in the destructive capability, they're pretty much the same.
So next question is for both of us, but I think you can answer this. In Berlin, there were cable tunnels connecting both Gefechtsturm and Leitturm. Are there any such tunnels in Hamburg and Vienna? I don't know for Hamburg, but I think probably too, because as I read for Vienna, that they were all connected, or they suspected that they were connected. I'm not sure if they could still find it, but in the drawings or something, they had something. Yeah, and they all, it wasn't cable tunnels, it was even the water supply or something. But I maybe mixed up. But there was a connection between them in a way, between the Gefechtsturm and Leitturm, which is the command, which is the combat and command towers. So next question, what? I hate when the chat jumps. So Bismarck, how? Okay, we had this. And Bismarck, with the German innovation in rocket technology, why didn't they use just dumbfire rockets firing vertically into the formation? They are cheap and could be deployed en masse.
They actually did that. They did that on planes. Yeah, they had even Me 262s armed with dumbfire rockets. And interestingly enough, back in 1940, 41, they had Bf 109 F2s with these kind of integrated pods for rockets, 2 rockets aside, which were on the one hand envisioned to be ground attack and the other hand envisioned against bombers. And it looks quite neat if you look at it. Just, you can Google it, Bf 109 F2 rockets or something, and you'll find that it's quite a neat little feature. However, back then, with the Bf 109s, they realized it's not effective enough. And then when I had the Me 262, of course, they fired a lot of rockets. So we're talking about 40 upwards, very small ones. They also had and this is something I mentioned in my video about German AA missiles, is the Typhoon, which is kind of a rocket that's more or less 2 meters in height. Once it puts on the ground, it's a dumbfire rocket, and they essentially wanted to places just below where they think the bombers are gonna come, and then just fire it upwards. But they realized that steering those rockets for a distance of 8 kilometers right into the sky is a big problem. Because they will go everywhere, and should some of them not explode properly, they will fly down and maybe hit something and so on. And they probably made the right call in saying, okay, let's not try that. Now there are, as far as I know, also with the Brits, that they were looking into trying to find maybe a dumbfire rocket kind of solution against enemy planes, and they had some prototypes there as well. I'd have to look more into them as well if they have any kind of studies on the effectiveness. But overall, dumbfire is, well, it's dumbfire. Yeah, it relies a lot on the training of the pilot or of the ground personnel. And if you're talking about distances of a couple of kilometers, the accuracy is going to be next to 0. And if you then want to say, okay, well, we can make some kind of delay fuse on the rocket that it explodes in 8,000 meters of altitude, yeah, okay. But if the bomber formation just makes a little bit of a turn, you just fired like a couple of 100 rockets into the sky, and they do absolutely nothing because the bombers are no longer going where they're supposed to go. And also, that being said, how many rockets do you have to fire before they finally start becoming effective? Firing a couple of hundred at the same time into the sky might sound nice, but with the accuracy problems, and yeah, it's probably not going to be effective. It's a nice idea, but they didn't go for it for a reason. And later generations of weapons also didn't go for that for a reason.
Yeah, the thing is, actually we have some very good post-war data on this. There's one incident at least that is quite astonishing, and I don't know the name, but I probably will talk about this at one point. I think it's really counterintuitive. You just think if you shoot something up, you're gonna hit something, but in the air it's quite different. If you even look at guided missiles, they have the first generations or second generations even, they don't hit so often as you would think, and they also had at this time proximity fuses. So a dumbfire without proximity fuse is probably not going to hit anything. And there was one incident, I think in the 50s, 60s or 70s in the United States, when I think a drone, basically I think it was an F6 Hellcat or even a Wildcat converted into a drone, and I think it was a target plane, and it didn't return. So they sent up 2 jet fighters that were only equipped with dumbfire rockets for interception. And those guys didn't hit with a single rocket. I think they fired a few hundred or something. But what they did, they set a whole area on fire from the rockets that missed. The whole area is burned, and lately the drone crashed on its own because it was never hit at all. So they sent up, under peace conditions, over their own skies, 2 fighter planes, 2 interceptors that would shoot down usually an enemy, and they couldn't hit another fighter plane flying. I think it flew in a curve or something at all, and they were not fired upon. They had all the time in the world and everything, and they didn't manage to hit one shot. And it still sounds quite unbelievable, but if you have to keep this in mind, read this up on Wikipedia, it's quite, and then keep this in mind if somebody tells you about dumbfire rockets shooting up in the air. It's something different if you shoot dumbfire on something on the ground, because it can only wait in one direction, and there's also less turbulence and everything. But up in the air, I think we're way too influenced by computer games and movies and everything. And
I was just gonna say, it's not War Thunder.
yeah, the problem is you have ballistic curves, you have everything that's going on, and the speeds, they have, even with, I mean, this was a drone, it was probably rather slow, but at 200-300 miles per hour, everything gets a little bit. I think there's this analogy when a knight in a joust would try to hit a penny moving at 50 miles per hour. At a certain point, you have 2 very fast moving things that try to kill each other, and then you shoot a third one that tries to hit the other one. I think if you start to doing calculations or something, would be quite interesting. You probably have a window of opportunity, probably of a few seconds or a few milliseconds or something along this line. So it sounds always like a good idea. I always thought the same way, and when you read data on this and see how it worked out in this case, you realize, okay, it probably wouldn't have made any difference or hit anything at all. So next one for me, did the Germans rely more on data analysis for strategic decisions, or did they rely more on their commanders' instincts? How did that compare to the Allies? Well, the Germans mostly relied on the gut feeling of Mr. Adolf Hitler, who overturned a lot of stuff when it came to strategic decisions, and he was quite, well, I think at a certain point he actually didn't listen to the generals and other experts anymore at certain things. So, and how did this compare to the Allies? The Allies were, for instance, the US forces usually took in a lot of civilian experts, and they were far less, they were more, I think also operations research and other stuff was created in the Second World War by the United States. So there was way more rational and data analysis going on. I mean, probably a very good example is the Fog of War documentary with Robert McNamara, where he talks about the analysis of bombing missions in the European theater, and then that they realized, I think they had a dropout quote of 25 to 30% of the pilots that didn't drop the bombs and returned prematurely, and that they reported this, and I think Curtis LeMay then acted upon and said, yeah, well, everybody that doesn't do this get court-martialed or something, and the effectiveness and everything went up way more. I think the Germans did their data analysis to a certain degree, but the strategic decisions were basically to a lot done by Hitler, and he also even did smaller decisions. I mean, in the Germany and the Second World War book series, basically in the index it's written the name Hitler is omitted, because he basically appears on every page unless it's completely about the Allies or the Italians. but usually even then he shows up, because he always had his fingers somewhere in there. So I don't know if I mean, he often referred to strategic stuff like the United States in his second book, like how it would be, how important it would be in the future and everything. So there were some rational decisions, but I don't know how much he at all was towards data analysis and everything. I think he was verbally, I mean, this is something I draw now from Jordan Peterson's Q&A, and he said, intelligence, you can be dumb only in one way, but you can be intelligent in many ways. And he noted that his verbal intelligence, Jordan Peterson's intelligence now, is verbally quite good or very high, but not in the numerical area. He's less. And I assume that, for instance, Hitler was also in the verbal scale pretty high, but probably not in the number area. So he would probably stay away from hardcore data, and most people that are really good in hardcore data usually don't end up in high leadership positions. They might get hurt by high leadership position guys, but usually not. And statistics and everything gets very complicated at certain points. But this was a very long answer. So now we have one for Bismarck and me. Would the flag towers have been more effective if they were grouped up together or if they were spread out more? So what's your take on this, Bismarck?
Well, that depends on what you judge with effectiveness. If you meant defensive effectiveness against bombers, the effectiveness would have not changed a lot because they're already pretty close to each other and they're already firing at the same incoming bombers. And for effectiveness, if you mean it as a defense for civilians and a shelter for civilians, well, that depends then on whether they had enough capacity in their specific area to house the people. If not, then obviously if they were grouped together, then they would be more effective. But if they did have enough capacity for the immediate vicinity, then it's fine. Generally, I think the flag towers would have not benefited from being close together or further apart, as long as they stay within the core of the city limits where they're essentially built.
So the next question is for both of us, but I can't really answer that. What would have happened if the German army in the Valais pocket was destroyed by the Allies? Would the Western Allies push on to Berlin and Prague?
It's a very loaded question.
Yeah, so
I mean, you can argue in any way there. It didn't, so.
Yeah, and I think the Rhine was still not so easy to take, I think. So next one, Rado cleared up his question. I still don't understand it.
I basically said that if they use primarily fighters, Jagdgeschwader 1 and 11, the main anti-air bomber force would have been wiped out. Do you agree? If they would have not used flak and only used those Jagdgeschwaders, yeah, you can make an argument that they would have suffered more losses or slightly more losses, but I'm not convinced that they would have suffered way more losses than they did. I mean, they were wiped out anyway, in a certain manner of speaking, and the problems for training and finding enough replacements were prominent, whether you use flak or not flak or no flak. So yeah, it's there might have been a small effect on them losing more men if flak was not as effective as it was, sure, but pretty much negligible.
So the next one is for you too, but I think I know a little bit of the answer. Why did Germany insist on using the 20mm caliber after 1938? The 30mm Mk101 was already in testing and would only need to be converted to belt fed. The 37mm could fill the gap until ready. I think the main problem is that the mainstay fighter, the 109, was rather small, and the 30mm and 37mm guns were quite large. I mean, this is probably one of the reasons, but Bismarck probably can answer this more.
Well, the 37mm is huge. I mean, you have a few planes in World War II that have a 37mm. One is, of course, is the P-39. But that plane was literally designed, not literally, but pretty much designed to house a cannon like that. Whereas with the Germans, they very early on tried to make a central mounted weapon that fires essentially through the V shape of the inline engine out of the propeller prop spinner as a mainstay of their fighters. You already have them trying it out with machine guns in Spain. It didn't really work out. And then you of course have the Emil. And you have the Emil because the Germans couldn't really make central mounted cannon work, so they had put the weapons in the wings. And then with the Friedrich, they finally made it work. But you got to remember, the Friedrichs first rolled out with 15 millimeter cannons, if you want to call it a cannon. 15 millimeter is, I mean, the MG151 was a good weapon, but a single one of those things is simply not enough. After that, trying to upgrade to a bigger caliber is quite hard. Going for 20 millimeter, going from 15 millimeter to 20 millimeter in the Friedrichs, relatively easy because it is essentially the same gun, slightly bigger caliber. But you don't have to do a lot inside the compartment where the engine is and the weapon is to facilitate the change of the caliber. It's pretty much just pop one in, pop one out, and pop one in. With the 30 millimeter, you're talking about a weapon that is substantially bigger. It has less ammo, which is always crucial, because if you look at the average accuracy of the World War II fighter pilot, it is not very high. We have this we have from video games and so on, we have a very inflated opinion about what accuracy can be achieved in a dogfight. It is not as in video games. The accuracy that you achieve is very, very low in reality. And this is, and as with the Germans, when they were using the 20 mil early on, they were still doing relatively fine. And the early success essentially made it seem to them like 20 mils are the way to go. Of course, then once they started seeing more armored or more tough aircraft, that's probably a better word, tough aircraft, like, you know, P-17 or British bombers or P-47s and so on. Of course, you want to go to a bigger caliber, like the 30 millimeter weapon. There is, however, problems converting the planes to a higher caliber, especially if the gun is completely different, not like the MG151 to the MG151-20, like I said. And that causes quite a lot of problems. I mean, if you just look at the Bf-109s when they changed their machine guns from 7.92 to 13 millimeter, the G6, for example, it has these ugly bulges on the engine, on top of the engine compartment. And that is because they couldn't make the weapon fit properly. And that shows you some of the problems you have with these kind of weapons. And it's the same thing, for example, if you look at the Spitfire, at the 20 mil cannons, the early Hispanos and the later ones, the ones that had a drum mag and then were belt fed, you also have bulges sometimes on the wings. So when you design a plane, you of course have a certain amount of caliber and weapon in mind. Once you progress down the development of the aircraft, and once you bring out new models, you will have to make substantial upgrades or changes to the aircraft design, even the internal design, to incorporate bigger guns. And the 37 millimeter gun is not easy to fit, for example. I mean, it's the Russians did it with the Yak-9T and so on, or even with the Lag-Fries, and they had horrible problems with those weapons in their aircraft because the aircraft was simply not designed to house such a weapon. And that is, I think, something that we often forget. Is it's just it's not just increasing the firepower, but it's what comes with that. It's the redesign of an aircraft quite substantially sometimes that is required to make these weapons work. That is why the 20 mil was for a long time a mainstay of the German fighter force. Also because in many ways it wasn't really required to go for 30 mil before the big bomber swarms came in. And that's a very long-winded answer to essentially say something that I could have said in one sentence, but whatever.
Well, next one is for me. Since the Type 3 towers were completed rather late during the war, have they seen action? And were they armed with smaller calibers as well? Yes, they saw definitely action. I mean, the bombing increased way more in the later stages of the war, and they were armed with the intention was to arm them with 12.8 centimeter flak guns, but initially they didn't have enough in Vienna, and I think they used 88 millimeters, 10.5, and not and also the 12.8 in the single gun configuration. So basically they used a lot of other stuff. And this question was botched up, but he replaced it again. It's for both of us again from Cashew. Bismarck and military. Do you think Flak in World War II as a whole was strategically or tactically effective in either theater, or was it mostly a talking effort to keep morale boosted? I think Flak was, or AA guns were, I think in the tactical sense, in low level attacks, I think they were still quite effective up to the end, and tactically effective. For the strategic, I would say we discussed it. I think at a certain point, at a certain altitude and speed, I think that the impact diminished extremely, but also for morale and also to reduce the effectiveness. For instance, if you remove all the flak guns, the bombers could just fly straight ahead all the time. They don't need corrections during the flight. They don't fly evasive maneuvers and everything. And this would probably increase fuel efficiency. Thus, they probably could carry a larger bomb load. It would less strain on the crew. It would probably also reduce wear and tear to a certain degree, and also many other factors. So it's hard to calculate sometimes if you only look at the cost for the guy using the flak guns, but also you need to look at the cost for the enemy in a certain degree. So I think we probably had to, I would say in a tactical sense, on low level attacks it was still very valid, especially for the Allies with the proximity fuse. And for strategic, I think it was probably not as effective for other means. So Bismarck, what's your take on this?
Yeah, I agree.
Excellent. So next question for me. So what are you wearing? I don't know exactly what that means. So I'm right now wearing a t-shirt. So are you planning doing a video about the Italian aircraft carrier Aquila? I'm not sure, rather unlikely, because I have many more topics and this is definitely not something I know about. With me, admittedly, I read that there were plans for a 15 centimeter flak gun on the towers. Do you know anything about this? No, I don't know anything about this, sadly, but it would make sense because, to a certain degree, because they would always upgrade their guns. And another one for me, fighters using the Werfergranate 21 rockets were pretty successful, but that was because they had a blast radius of 30 meters. Also, do you know of any other countries using AA rockets?
Britain dabbled into it. The UK dabbled into it, as far as I know. But whether they got further than the Germans or not sure. I think it was pretty much kept to a minimum during the war.
Yeah. So next one for both of us. Will either of you take a look at the field medical care during the war of either side and how it changed throughout the war? I don't think Bismarck will take a look at field medical care, but you never know. And I might at some point. I have some statistics for the British in World War One, and I will, to a certain degree, probably look at it if I take a closer look at losses. But I mean, I actually specifically did something with medical. This is the Navy Corpsman interview, which is basically a combat medic, if you want to call it that way, and the fuel rates are extremely low. So this is I always take the fuel rates as an indicator. There's one thing is my interest, and usually my interest when I do some topic is then, let's say, not reduced, but it's it's satisfied. But if I see the view rates are extremely low, I usually move on to other topics because there's so much stuff which I'm interested in. So medical stuff rather unlikely to happen. So for both of us, Bismarck and me. Sorry, guys, should have been clearer. I meant 30 millimeter flak for use. Okay. Yeah. We talked off our mouths here, and then you meant something different. Yeah, Bismarck. So another one, the 30 millimeter flak. Why not the 30 millimeter and the 20 millimeter?
Well, 20 millimeter, 30 millimeter has, they have different. I mean, the Germans went for, you said that in the original post, 20, 30, 37. 20 and 37 in itself are already pretty solid weapons. Obviously, one fires faster. The other one has a higher volume. Has a longer effective range and all that stuff. You have different, capabilities. Of course, one you generally call it as light, and the other one you call it as medium flak. Why they didn't exactly go for a 30 millimeter gun in the beginning, I'm not quite sure. Probably because they felt like if they have a 20 millimeter and a 37 millimeter, then they don't have to fill the gap because they have two guns that already fulfill a certain role within their defense force, within the flak force. So that would be my guess.
Also, you need to take into account production and everything. For instance, the MG42 was way easier and more efficient to boost than the MG34. But till the very end, they still used the 34 in certain vehicles and still built it. So sometimes you have the production line or some other stuff set up, and there's a whole production chain, the logistical chain, all these processes, and everything is intertwined. You always need to take the look at the whole system, the whole established guns and everything. So, and in 38, I think you mentioned that the 30 millimeter was ready in 38. So that's pretty late. If it was in the 30s or 35, you could say, okay, then they could make conversion. But in 39, you already had the war, and so I would say that this is also something that needs to be taken into account. So, which World War II series did you just mention? I don't know to what this refers. Probably the book series, Germany and the Second World War. So, at military history, did Japan have any plans for solving their natural resource crisis, specifically oil and various metals? Was there open discussion of this between the Japanese high command? I mean, their expansion into the Philippines and other areas was actually quite successful in gaining a lot of resources that they would have needed for building up their empire. And it was also driven their strategy to a certain degree, but how it was discussed, I mean, open discussion in the Japanese high command, I think that the term open discussion and the Japanese leadership, I don't know, they had quite a lot of assassination going on back then, so I'm not sure if open discussion is the right word for anything concerning the Japanese prior to World War II and in World War II. Because I think they were rather rigid in most stuff. And also for instance, the Japanese Navy for a long time didn't told the army how high the losses were at the Battle of Midway. They said, oh, we lost. But not that, the aircraft carriers went down or something. So open and Japanese at this point in time are more like, words that don't go together. At both of us, were these flag towers well known by the Allies? I think we had this already.
Yeah, so that, yeah.
And next one, both of us, what would have happened if the American and British continued to push off beaches and answer instead of digging in? I can't really answer this question because I'm not too well read on this yet. How were the flag guns moved on top of the towers? Were the crane contraptions, I don't know if this is a word, on the sides, or were they dismantled and carried up the stairs on the inside? I don't know. I assume that certain parts probably would have taken care of with a crane, because I'm not sure if the barrel and everything, you can't carry it up that way. So both of us, what is your opinion about Hitler's super gun in France, and do you plan on doing a video about it? I think it was another rather useless weapon, and I might do a video on it. I think you probably referred to the Vivri or the Hochdruckpumpe, or how it was called. I mean,
Druckkanone.
yeah, and I know, but also I think there was a regular railway gun also that fired. So I think I think we can close it now, because the question, this one for you. Bismarck, did large flak use tracers? I heard the RAF bomber crews describe them as flaming onions.
Yeah, they were. What I think you're referring to is flare shells, or light shells, or illumination rounds. That's it, illumination rounds. Yes, they were used sometimes, especially to essentially give a clearer picture of where the bombers are, and they were also used in conjunction with the Nachtjagd, the night fighters.
So, and here we have the last question for you. What can you tell us about the effectiveness or lack thereof of the triple stabilized mounts of the Kriegsmarine flak?
I have no idea. I'm a Luftwaffe guy, guys. Yeah. I don't know anything about the Kriegsmarine.
So I don't have any clue either. Probably Justin has one. So
yeah, probably Justin.
Probably Justin, because this is always to refer to probably Justin. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you, Bismarck, for dropping by.
Well, thanks for having me again.
And then I would say we close this live stream for today, and see you next time.
Bye bye, guys.